A reading from Joshua. Joshua gathered all the tribes of Israel to Shechem and summoned the elders, the heads, the judges, and the officers of Israel, and they presented themselves before God. And Joshua said to all the people, "Now therefore revere the Lord and serve him in sincerity and faithfulness. Put away the gods that your ancestors served beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. Now if you are unwilling to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your ancestors served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you are living. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord." Then the people answered, "Far be it from us that we should forsake the Lord to serve other gods. For it is the Lord our God who brought us and our ancestors up from the land of Egypt and out of the house of slavery, and who did those great signs in our sight. He protected us along all the way that we went, and among all the peoples through whom we passed. And the Lord drove out before us all the peoples, the Amorites, who lived in the land. Therefore, we will also serve the Lord, for he is our God." The word of the Lord.
So most of us, we like having choices. Choices give us freedom and opportunity, and sometimes a sense that we have some kind of control about what's going to be happening in our lives. Indeed, most of us expect to have choices in most areas of our lives. And if we don't have choices, it can feel like we're being denied an inalienable right. Still, sometimes choices are hard. And as much as I like having choices, I sometimes have a difficult time making a choice because there are too many choices. You know, you go into a restaurant and there are 4 or 5 things on the menu and you go, boy, all those sound good, but I can only eat one. There's a lot of choices. Or worse, here, pick a color and there are 5,000 choices. I don't know. This is why when you get the emails every week and they have really good colors that work with each other, Judy picks those. I don't, because I can't deal with the 5,000. I don't know. I get stuck with the paralysis of analysis of too many choices. But sometimes choices are hard because all of my choices look bad. There are times when I do not like any of my options. I have voted in elections like this, maybe you have too. But it's sometimes the case that when we need to make a choice, no choice looks all that good. And so we have to figure out what the least bad option is. And I don't like having to pick the least bad option. I am sometimes tempted to not make a choice at all, but as that one song says, not making a choice is still making a choice, and often it's another bad choice. Sometimes choices present us with multiple bad options. And sometimes making a choice is hard because I am afraid of making a mistake with my choice. Now, I got to tell you that almost always when I look back on big choices that I have made in my life, I'm almost always content that I've made a good choice. But for some reason, I am often still haunted by the fear that my choice, which seems good right now, may end up being the wrong choice. And so I end up agonizing over choices that really don't require that much thought or analysis. I was thinking about this the other night. I was trying to decide whether I should take the plunge and buy something on Amazon that costs $20 or whether it would be a waste of money. And I'm sitting there going, you know, it's like $20. I shouldn't be agonizing over this. But sometimes we have choices, really big choices, and we're afraid that we've made the wrong choice, or we might make the wrong choice. In today's first reading, Joshua has led the ancient Israelites across the Jordan River and finally into the Promised Land. They've settled in and begun a new life, the new life that they had been waiting for 40 years of wandering in the desert. And as they begin this new life, Joshua calls them together and asks them to choose this day whom you will serve. Were they going to serve the God who had brought them out of slavery? Would they serve the Mesopotamian gods of their ancestors? Or would they serve the gods of Egypt that they had served in their time of slavery? Make a choice, says Joshua. Choose. And it sounds like a happy ending because they all answer, Far be it from us that we should ever serve any god except the Lord. But as the story continues, that wasn't always the way it was. Sometimes those folks and their descendants served the Lord. Sometimes they served other gods. And not infrequently, just to hedge their bets, they served both the Lord and the other gods. The choice was not a one-time choice. It was a choice that they and their descendants needed to make every day. Who did they think God was? How would they live in relation to that God? And how would that relationship with God drive the way they lived in community with one another? Those questions raised all kinds of choices which they were called to make each and every day. And those are the same kinds of choices we're called by God to make as well. Who is God in our lives? How do we live in relationship with that God? And how does our relationship with God affect how we live in community with each other? Those questions pose a myriad of choices for us each day as well. But while our readings today focus on the choices of the people, what's in the background is the choices that God has made and continues to make each day. While our choices can be hard and confusing, the choices that God calls us to are always made in the context of God's choice for us. See, the people of Israel get to make a choice because God had already chosen them. God was committed to them. That was God's choice, and that never changed. God makes that same choice and that same promise to us in baptism. We get claimed as God's children. God has made a choice for us, and that choice never changes. And because of that, we get to make choices. No matter what choices we make, Jesus promises us in baptism that God's choice for us doesn't change. And that affects the way we can look at all of our choices. God's choice also means that God is helping us in making our choices. God has always chosen to help make choices for us. In today's gospel reading, Jesus also asked the 12 to make a choice, right? Are they going to continue to follow him, or are they going to stop following him around like a number of his other disciples? This is an issue because Jesus has been leading a Bible study in the synagogue. All 6 weeks now we've been reading all this stuff about flesh and blood, and we're going, this is weird. What is Jesus? Only at the very, very end does John tell us, oh, by the way, you've been listening in on Jesus' Bible study in a synagogue. And all this flesh and blood stuff that he's been talking about in this Bible study has been too much for some of his disciples. And yet somehow these words that Jesus speaks help the 12 to see God's promise of life. And that's what helps them to make a choice, at least that day, to continue to follow Jesus. The choices that God calls us to make, you see, are not like the choices in that old game show where, you know, you're going to make a choice. You're going to pick what's behind door number 1, door number 2, or door number 3. But you have no idea what's behind any of those doors. The choices God calls us to make are always choices God is helping us to make by giving us guidance and help and strength. And sometimes the help and the strength, it's hard. It means that we're going to have to talk to each other. We're going to have to pray. We're going to have to be open to the Spirit's working in our lives. We're going to have to be willing to make mistakes. It might even involve Bible study, which this is one of the only Bible studies we hear about in the New Testament, and it makes everybody crazy, so it's no wonder that so many people don't want to go to Bible study. But that Bible study helps. It helps these folks be able to see what God is doing and saying in their lives. It means that God is helping people to make choices. And that, even though our choices are hard, is always something we can rely on each and every day. And God has promised, God's choice is that God is always promising forgiveness. See, I mean, we make wrong choices all the time. The ancient Israelites did too. But in the Bible, whenever anybody asks for forgiveness for their wrong choice, God always chooses to forgive. And they get the opportunity to make new choices. and see if God can and will forgive us. We can at least forgive ourselves or give ourselves the freedom to make what seems the best choice, or at least the least bad choice, when we face those choices in our lives. This is what Luther meant when he made that famous quote that we always put on t-shirts in campus ministry back in the day. Said, "Sin boldly," in big letters, and then in real little type underneath it said, "But believe in Christ more boldly still." Because Luther was talking to people who said, my gosh, if I make a choice, my choice might be wrong, and my choice might not be perfect, and I'm going to sin, and therefore I won't make a choice, which is another way of sinning. And Luther said, no, no, no. Jesus calls you to make choices. Jesus calls you to go out and do the things that God calls you to do, even if it's imperfect, because God has promised you forgiveness. So don't be paralyzed in your choices, because God's choice is always to give you forgiveness and to give you a chance to try again if you make the wrong choice. You know, usually I like having choices, but sometimes choices can be hard. Choices can be confusing, and sometimes I'm really not sure whether I'm making the right choice. But whether our choices seem good or bad, easy or hard, Jesus has shown us that God has made a choice for us that never changes. Jesus promises to help us in making choices that are healthy for us and for our neighbors. And most of all, Jesus promises us that even when we make the wrong choices, God's forgiveness and God's love is always promised to us.